You know that feeling, right? You're just driving along, minding your own business, and bam, a little light flicks on in your dashboard. Instant dread. But what if I told you that, a lot of the time, the secret to that light is a tiny, overlooked part working its tail off inside your engine? Well, today, we're going to meet that unsung hero.
Right. That infamous check engine light. It's basically your car's only way of talking to you, but let's be honest, it's not a great conversationalist. It could mean a dozen different things, but one of the most common reasons it pops up is because of a small sensor with a huge job.
And here is. This is the oxygen sensor, or O2 sensor for short. Yeah, it doesn't look like much, but this little guy is absolutely critical for your car's emissions and your fuel economy. You can think of it as the car computer's #1 informant on how well the engine is actually burning fuel.
So let's get to know this little powerhouse. We're going to break down exactly what it's doing in there, how it got to be so smart, and why keeping it healthy is so important for your car, your wallet, and hey, even the air we all breathe. The best way to think about the oxygen sensor is as the nose of your engine. Seriously, it's constantly smelling the exhaust fumes to figure out if the engine is running rich or lean. Its whole job is to measure how much unburned oxygen is trying to escape out the tailpipe.
And where it lives is key to its job. As you can see here, it's placed right in the exhaust system. There's at least one of them, called the upstream sensor, sitting right before the catalytic converter. From there, it sends its smell report straight back to the car's brain, the engine control unit, or ECU.
Now, the whole reason it's doing all this sniffing is to help the engine achieve something called the stoichiometric ratio. It sounds super technical, but it's really just the perfect recipe for combustion. For a gasoline engine, that magic number is 14.7 parts of air to exactly 1 part of fuel. This little sensor is basically the chef, making sure that recipe is perfect every single time.
And it works ridiculously fast. We are talking up to 100 times every single second. It's in this constant high-speed chat with the ECU, basically yelling, hey, a little more fuel, or whoa, back off on the air, making tiny adjustments on the fly to keep everything in that perfect balance.
So, how in the world does it do that? Well, the science is actually pretty cool. Inside, there's a special ceramic element made of zirconia. When this thing gets hot, it acts like a tiny battery. It compares the oxygen in the hot exhaust to the fresh air outside the pipe, and based on that difference, it generates a small voltage. A high voltage tells the computer the mix is too rich, and a low voltage means it's too lean. It's that simple little signal that runs the whole show.
But you know, the sensor we have in our cars today, well, it wasn't always this clever. It's actually got a pretty fascinating history of getting faster, smarter, and more accurate over the years. It all started back in the late 70s with these unheated sensors that took like a full minute just to warm up enough to start working. Then in the 80s, a real game changer. They added tiny internal heaters. That slashed the warm-up time. By the 90s, with new OBDI regulations, cars needed more sensors and way more precision. And that brings us to today, with these incredibly fast wideband sensors that make modern, super clean engines even possible. Of course, just like any hero, our little O2 sensor has its weaknesses. It lives in one of the most brutal places in your car. We're talking extreme heat and nasty corrosive gases. So eventually, failures are going to happen. The question is, what takes these good sensors down? You might actually start to feel the problems before that check engine light ever comes on. The classic sign? Your gas mileage suddenly tanks. You might also notice the engine is idling a little rough, or it hesitates when you step on the gas. And oh yeah, if you've got an emissions test, a bad O2 sensor is one of the top reasons cars fail. Okay, now this is a really important point, so lean in for this one. Just because you get an error code related to the O2 sensor doesn't automatically mean the sensor itself is broken. Remember, its job is to report information, so a code that says the engine is running lean might just mean the sensor is doing its job perfectly by telling you there's a vacuum leak somewhere else. The code is a clue, not the final answer.
So, what are the real killers? Well, first off, just plain old age. They live a hard life and they aren't meant to last forever. A checkup around 60,000 miles is a pretty smart idea. The second big one is contamination, or poisoning, from things it shouldn't be touching, like antifreeze or silicone. And finally, since modern sensors have those little heaters, an electrical problem can knock them out too.
Let's actually look at some of the damage. On the left, you've got a nice, healthy sensor. But on the right, yikes! That one is coated in thick, sooty carbon because the engine was burning way too much fuel. That coating basically suffocates the sensor. It can't smell the exhaust anymore, and that leads directly to terrible gas mileage and way more pollution.
And here's another enemy. Silicone. See that chalky white coating? That happens when someone uses the wrong kind of sealant on an engine repair. That silicone gets vaporized, finds its way into the exhaust, and poisons the sensor tip, making it totally useless. It's a perfect example of how one little mistake on a totally different repair can create a brand new problem.
And maybe the worst one of all is antifreeze. If you've got something like a leaky head gasket, coolant gets into the engine and out through the exhaust, poisoning the sensor on its way out. The thing is, you can't clean a contaminated sensor. It has to be replaced. And more importantly, you have to fix the leak that caused it, or you'll just ruin the new one too.
So, after all that, why should you really care about this one tiny part? Well, it all boils down to three things that matter to pretty much everyone: your wallet, the health of your engine, and the environment.
I mean, just look at the difference. With a healthy sensor, you get the best fuel economy your car can offer, you're putting out clean emissions, and your engine is purring along smoothly. But when it fails, your gas mileage can drop by as much as 40%. Your emissions go through the roof, and you start risking damage to other, much more expensive parts. The bottom line is, ignoring a bad O2 sensor costs you real money, plain and simple.
So the next time that check engine light comes on, maybe don't just feel that sense of dread. Feel a little bit of curiosity. It might just be your car's way of telling you that its hardest working, most unsung hero needs a little bit of help. It's a tiny part that makes a huge, huge difference. So is yours still up to the job?